Okay, let's move on to the hip coil section of your triple threat golf swing program. Now we're getting into the center of gravity area. As the famous pop singer Shakira says, the hips don't lie. This is the hallmark of any athlete, the ability to have intelligent, compliant, mobile, strong, and resilient hips. And it applies into the golf swing as well. This is something that I learned right from the beginning of my golf performance consulting career. I had the pleasure of working with Jim McLean, and this is one of his ideas that he's known for, the X factor, having the discrepancy between shoulder turn and hip turn at the top of the backswing. That's his X factor. So in order to be able to assume those positions, the body has to be compliant in the various positions. So everything that we've learned up to this point was preparing you to assume those positions. But the two drills that you have here are going to help you solidify that. So the two areas that you want to be concerned with as it relates to the hip coil are your hip flexors, and I'll explain to you why in a minute. Your hip flexors and your adductor, which is essentially your groin. Both of these are actually your groin muscles per se. They have an influence on the inner thigh area and the upper inner hip area. And that area is what allows your hips to rotate into position. That's what's important. So these two stretchers are going to be addressing those areas. So the groin rock stretch is addressing those short inner thigh muscles, short adductor muscles that's going to allow you a clean, uninterrupted pivot into your weight transfer and your backswing. If those muscles are tight, again, it'll essentially activate the parking brake when it comes to your ability to coil, create torque, and build up that kinetic energy, because you'll end up having a sway rather than a clean rotation that allows you to stay within the door jamb, as we say. When you're swinging, you want to imagine you're standing within this invisible doorway, and the degree that you can stay in that doorway is going to be where you're going to be able to stay accurate and to transfer as much power into the golf ball as possible. The more you end up swaying off, that's when you get leaks and inconsistencies and things like that. So the groin rock stretch allows you to shift into your hip rather than doing a reverse pivot or reverse hip shift. So that's what this particular drill is helping you to do. Now, this one, as well as the hip flex, the lunge stretch, they're quite intense. So on this drill, you can do this on a soft floor if you have a yoga mat, or I'm demonstrating it here in a park on grass. But you want to be able to be in a position to have your knees be comfortable. So if you have issues there, you can even do it on your bed, so that way your knees are comfortable and you're not having to worry about that. So two variations. You can do this on your elbows, which is a little bit more advanced, or you can do it up on your hands. Either one will be effective if you're running on the tight side. If you're tighter, just start on your hands, because it's just going to allow you to have more control over your hips, and through using your hands to keep you locked into position. And again, you'll be using your release techniques on this one. This one in particular, we're going to be doing an isometric contraction by pressing your knees gently into the floor, and then when you release them, you should be able to open your knees out just a little wider. Again, you're not going to be aggressive on any of these stretches. Let the repetition create the elasticity in the tissue. If you try to force into these stretches, it's going to have the opposite effect. Okay, if you're tight, especially if you're tight, if you try to force a stretch when it's not ready, you'll activate your muscle spindles, and that causes the muscles to actually contract and you end up getting tight. Or if you may feel your body start to shake, that's your spindle is telling you that you stop doing that. So it's better to try to sneak underneath the radar of when that spindle activates. So everything is really smooth, really gentle, and just allow the breathing and the repetition to allow you to slowly creep open. Okay. So that is what that does. And again, the next variation you'll do with, I'll zoom in so you can see. This variation here is on the elbows, and it's just because you're creasing your hips more, it provides a little bit more of an intense stretch as opposed to here where there's less of a hip crease. Okay. So what you'll see in the instructional videos as well, especially with the new ones, the new updated version of the videos, is that I'll have you come out of this position in between repetitions just to decompress your hips. And then when you go back in, you'll tend to be more flexible. Okay. This is why I always recommend that you do the stretches at least twice, because the first round would be kind of like your warm up. It prepares the tissue, you release it, and then when you go back, you'll tend to be able to go deeper and gain that flexibility for that particular repetition, right? So think about, it's like you're creeping, you're gaining mobility 1 degree at a time. So be patient with it and just let the cumulative exposure get your overall gains. They will add up, I promise you. And then this position here is another relief position. So if you want to go up, just because when your hips are creased, they do provide compression in the hips. So if you wanted to come into this position and just extend out, you see now my hips are extended. This will allow you to kind of decompress your hips, and then when you go back to either one of these, again, it'll elicit the response that I just mentioned. All right. So that's a more detailed look at the groin rock stretch. So now we go on to the kneeling lunge stretch. So now with the kneeling lunge stretch, so what this stretch is doing, it's stretching the hip flexor, or what is known as the iliopsoas. Now this muscle is important because this muscle is like, it behaves very similarly to the levator scapulae muscle, which is in the levator scapulae stretch. You see, the levator scapulae is the bridge between your shoulder and your neck. And so the hip flexor is the bridge between your spine, your lumbar spine, and your legs and your pelvis. So when track athletes, quote unquote, pull their groin muscle, it's not their actual adductor. It's actually this muscle is what actually gets injured, because this muscle connects into your lumbar spine. It literally connects to your lumbar spine, runs through the front of your hips, and connects on the inner upper side of your thigh bone. So that's why when you do a sit-up, it pulls you up this way, or if you're lying on your back and doing leg lifts, it pulls your legs up this way. So they work at both ends. So how does this relate to your golf swing? Well, if this muscle isn't compliant, it makes it difficult for you to, number one, get into your address posture, number two, maintain your swing plane, and three, exert any power coming through. So this muscle is literally the bridge for all of that. And depending on how your posture is presenting, you'll need to do this stretch more or less. So again, following the instructions here and following the videos, there's three variations of this. There's the beginner version, which is here where my arms are out to the sides, just straight down, no problem. I'm just focusing on maintaining hip position and leaning forward into the stretch. You'll see my knee here is at 90. I'll get into here, tuck the pelvis under, and shift forward into the stretch. Okay, the key here is I'm leaning forward and I'm maintaining tension through my buttock. If you're in this and your butt's loose, you're not gonna get the stretch. You're gonna end up hanging on your hip capsule, which is not a good thing. We wanna keep this muscular and not hanging on your hip joint capsule. Over time, that can create laxity and eventually potentially some osteoarthritic changes in the hip. This happens a lot in yoga and people who hang on their ligaments doing overstretching rather than focusing on the musculoskeletal component. And this is the intermediate version where my arm is above my head here. I'm reaching straight up. I'm adding a more of a lat component, more of a shoulder, getting more along the oblique. And then the advanced version is just straight medieval, where I'm actually reaching over to the other side. So now I'm really getting the stretch in that hip flexor full length. I'm stretching it both at the spine where it connects and all the way into the groin or the inner thigh area here. So this is full stretch, but I'm also getting the lat, the oblique, and that side of my abdominal wall. So, and if you can see, it's almost like a little bit of levator as well. So this is a full big bang drill here. So there's different variations that you can work up to, but you can put a bolster underneath your hand, a yoga block, or even a chair or a Swiss ball on the opposite side if you need to. There's different variations. Again, if you want to tweak this according to what your needs are, you can always book a coaching session with me and we can get into that. But basically on these three, figure out which one that you can do with perfect form. All right, so you can see in the hip coil section, there's only 2 drills, but it's taken me quite a few minutes to help you understand why you're doing this. So hopefully you now understand the modus operandi of these drills as well as all the previous drills and why everything is in this order, the benefits, and how practicing this is going to help you get to where you want to be. So like I said, at the end of the day, when you practice this enough, you should be able to complete this whole sequence within 10 to 15 minutes, depending on what your goal is. If you just want to touch it as a tune-up, it should take you 10 minutes. If you want to get more of a corrective, deep, restorative, is that a word? Yeah, restorative stretch, you can sink in a little bit longer, but either way, you're going to get a good training effect. All right. So we will cut it off here, and then in the next video I will go over the mobility sequence and we'll wrap it up from there.